She walked into a botanical garden on a random Tuesday afternoon and burst into tears. Not sad tears or happy tears, but tears of recognition so deep they shook her entire body. She stood in front of a display of medicinal herbs, plants with labels explaining their scientific properties, and she knew them, not from books or classes, but from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. The feverfew spoke to her about headaches and inflammation. The yarrow whispered about wounds and bleeding. The motherwort told her secrets about the heart and childbirth. And she had no idea how she knew any of this, because she had never studied herbalism in her life. Her name was Claire, and she worked as an accountant in a modern city office. Numbers were her world. Spreadsheets and tax codes and financial projections. There was nothing mystical or spiritual about her daily life. She was the type to believe in past lives or psychic abilities or any of that new age stuff her sister was always talking about. But standing in that botanical garden, surrounded by plants that somehow felt like old friends, she couldn't deny what was happening. Something inside her recognized these herbs with an intimacy that went beyond intellectual knowledge. The experience shook her so badly that she had to sit down on a bench. Her hands were trembling, her heart was racing, and in her mind, she kept seeing flashes of images that didn't belong to her current life. She saw herself in a small wooden cottage, bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling to dry. She saw her hands, different hands, older and more weathered, grinding something in a stone mortar. She saw sick people coming to her door, trusting her with their pain, believing in her ability to heal them. The images were vivid and detailed and completely inexplicable. Claire tried to dismiss it. Stress, she told herself. She had been working too hard, not sleeping enough. Her mind was playing tricks on her. But over the following weeks, the experiences intensified. She would see herbs in grocery stores or gardens and instantly know their uses. She would meet people and intuitively sense what remedies they needed for ailments they hadn't mentioned. She started having dreams of that cottage, of preparing medicines, of treating wounds and fevers and all manner of illnesses with plants and prayers. It got to the point where she couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was trying to break through, some memory or knowledge from somewhere beyond her current lifetime. Her sister, when Claire finally admitted what was happening, immediately suggested past life regression. Claire resisted at first. It seemed too weird, too outside her rational worldview. But the experiences kept coming, kept intensifying, and finally she agreed to try it. What did she have to lose? The regression therapist her sister recommended was a woman named Dr. Helen, who had a calm, grounded presence that made the whole thing feel less strange. They talked for a long time before beginning any hypnosis. Claire described the incident at the botanical garden, the intuitive knowledge of herbs, the flashes of memory about a cottage and healing work. Dr. Helen explained that sometimes past life memories surfaced spontaneously, especially when triggered by something in the present that strongly resonated with a previous incarnation. The botanical garden had been Claire's trigger, awakening memories of a lifetime where plant medicine had been central to her existence. Dr. Helen explained the regression process. She would guide Claire into a deep state of relaxation where her subconscious mind could access memories beyond this current lifetime. They would explore the life where this herbal knowledge came from, understand who Claire had been in that incarnation, and hopefully integrate those memories in a way that made sense of the current experiences. Claire arrived for her session both nervous and curious. Part of her still didn't fully believe in reincarnation, but another part, the part that recognized those herbs with such certainty, knew that something real was happening. Dr. Helen's office was warm and comfortable, with soft lighting and gentle music playing. They began with breathing exercises, helping Claire relax and center herself. Then Dr. Helen started the guided regression, her voice steady and soothing as she led Claire deeper and deeper into trance. She used imagery of a staircase, each step taking Claire down into her subconscious, down into the realm where soul memories lived. At the bottom of the staircase, Dr. Helen suggested, Claire would find herself in the lifetime that held her herbal knowledge, the life where plants had been her allies and healing had been her purpose. Claire felt herself descending, felt her conscious mind becoming quiet, felt a deeper awareness rising up to replace it. And when she reached the bottom of the staircase and stepped through a doorway, she found herself in a completely different time and place. The transition was so smooth and natural that it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like remembering. She was in a cottage, just like the one she had seen in her flashes of memory. It was small and simple, with rough wooden walls and a thatched roof. Bundles of herbs hung from every available surface, filling the air with a complex mix of scents that was both medicinal and comforting. There was a fire burning in a stone hearth, a pot of something simmering over it. The light coming through the small windows was the golden light of late afternoon. Dr. Helen's voice came from somewhere distant, asking Claire to look at herself, to notice her body and her clothes. Claire looked down and saw she was wearing a simple dress made of rough brown fabric, with a white apron tied over it. Her hands were older than Claire's current hands, marked by age and work. With dirt under the fingernails from gathering plants, she felt the weight of her body, the ache in her back from bending over gardens and sick beds, the familiar comfort of moving through this space she knew so well. Dr. Helen asked her name. The answer came easily, rising from somewhere deep inside. "Mary," she said. "My name is Mary. Mary Thornhill." Dr. Helen asked what year it was, where she lived. Mary answered that it was 1643, and she lived in a small village in rural England. The information flowed without effort, like she was simply reporting facts about her current reality rather than remembering something from centuries ago. Dr. Helen asked Mary to describe her life, her work, and Mary explained, her words coming through Claire's mouth but with a cadence and vocabulary that felt old and foreign. She was the village healer, the wise woman people came to when they were sick or injured. She had learned her craft from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before that. The knowledge had been passed down through generations of women, carefully guarded and lovingly shared. Mary described how she worked with the plants. It wasn't just about knowing which plant helped which ailment, though that knowledge was crucial. It was about relationship. The plants were alive, conscious in their own way, and Mary had learned to listen to them. She would walk through the forests and fields, and the plants would call to her, would show her where they grew and when they needed to be harvested. She would talk to them as she gathered them, thanking them for their medicine, asking them to lend their healing power to the people who needed them. Dr. Helen asked about specific herbs, curious about the knowledge Mary possessed, and Mary spoke easily about her plant allies. The willow barked for pain and fever, the comfrey for broken bones and deep wounds, the mugwort for women's cycles and prophetic dreams, the elderflower for respiratory infections, the hawthorn for the heart. Each plant had its own personality, its own gifts, its own way of working with the human body and spirit. Mary also described how she prepared her medicines. It wasn't just a matter of boiling or grinding the plants. There was ritual involved, intention and prayer woven into every step of the process. She would gather plants at specific times, often at dawn or dusk when the veil between worlds was thin. She would prepare her remedies with focused attention, speaking words of healing over them, asking God and the saints and the spirits of the plants themselves to infuse the medicine with their power. The physical properties of the herbs were important, but the spiritual dimension was equally vital. Dr. Helen asked Mary to show a specific memory, a time when her healing work had been particularly significant. The scene shifted, and Mary found herself standing at the door of her cottage. It was night, dark and cold, and someone was knocking urgently. Mary opened the door to find a man she recognized from the village, his face etched with fear and desperation. His wife was in labor, he said, and something was wrong. The baby wouldn't come. The midwife had tried everything. They needed Mary's help. Mary grabbed her basket of supplies and followed the man through the dark village to his home. Inside, she found the laboring woman on a bed, exhausted and in terrible pain. The midwife, an older woman Mary knew well, shook her head grimly. The baby was stuck. If it didn't come soon, both mother and child would likely die. Mary assessed the situation quickly, feeling for the baby's position, sensing the energy of the woman's body. She knew what needed to be done. She prepared a tea from herbs she carried in her basket, blue cohosh to strengthen contractions, raspberry leaf to tone the womb, a touch of motherwort to calm the mother's panic and support her heart. She spoke prayers over the tea as it steeped, calling on Saint Margaret, the patron of childbirth, asking for grace and assistance. Then she helped the woman drink it, holding her, breathing with her, guiding her through the pain. But Mary knew the herbs alone might not be enough. She placed her hands on the woman's belly, feeling for the baby, and as she did, something happened that went beyond the physical. She felt energy flowing through her hands, a warm, tingling sensation that wasn't coming from her, but through her. She let it flow, trusting it, guiding it toward the baby, encouraging the little one to turn, to move into position, to find the way out into the world. The woman cried out, The midwife checked and gasped. The baby was moving, turning, descending. Within minutes, the child was born, a healthy baby girl with strong lungs and a fierce cry. The mother wept with relief and joy. The father fell to his knees, thanking God and thanking Mary. And Mary, exhausted but filled with quiet satisfaction, cleaned and wrapped the baby, checked the mother, and left instructions for her care over the coming days. As she walked home through the dark village, her basket lighter now, Mary felt the familiar sense of purpose that had guided her entire adult life. This was what she had been born to do, not just mixing herbs, but being present in moments of crisis, being a channel for healing energy, being a bridge between life and death. She didn't think of herself as special or magical. She was simply doing what the women in her family had always done, what she had been trained to do since childhood. But Dr. Helen asked Mary to move forward in time, to see what happened as the years passed. And the scene shifted again, showing Claire a different chapter of Mary's life. Mary was older now, perhaps in her 60s, and the village had changed. There were new people, outsiders, who had come with new ideas and new fears. They spoke of witchcraft and devil worship. They looked at women like Mary with suspicion and hostility. Mary heard whispers, people saying that her medicines were unnatural, that her healing power came from dark sources, people questioning how she could save lives that others couldn't save, how she could cure diseases that defied conventional treatment, people wondering if she had made a pact with the devil, if her herbs were actually poisons, if her prayers were actually curses. The whispers grew louder, became accusations, turned into a mob mentality that Mary recognized as dangerous. She tried to keep her head down, tried to be less visible. But then a child in the village became ill with a fever. The parents, influenced by the new religious fervor sweeping the area, refused to let Mary treat the child. They prayed instead, trusting only in God and the church. The child died. And somehow, impossibly, people blamed Mary. They said she had cursed the child out of spite for not being called to help. They said she had caused the fever through witchcraft. No amount of reason or logic could penetrate their fear and superstition. Claire felt Mary's fear and bewilderment. She had spent her entire life healing people, had saved countless lives, had devoted herself to service and compassion. And now she was being painted as evil, as dangerous, as someone who harmed rather than helped. It made no sense, but fear rarely makes sense. And once a community decides someone is a witch, evidence and reason become irrelevant. They came for her one night, men from the village and beyond, encouraged by a traveling preacher who saw witches everywhere he looked. They dragged Mary from her cottage, accusing her of all manner of impossible crimes. They searched her home, finding exactly what they expected to find because they didn't understand what they were seeing. Herbs became evidence of poison. Tools for grinding and mixing became implements of dark magic. Books of recipes handed down through generations became grimoires of evil spells. Mary was taken to a holding cell, a cold, dark place where she waited for judgment. She tried to explain, tried to make them understand that her work was healing, that her knowledge came from generations of careful observation and relationship with plants, that there was no malice or darkness in what she did. But her words fell on ears closed by fear and religious fervor. The trial was a mockery of justice. Mary was accused of causing deaths and illnesses that had natural explanations. She was accused of consorting with demons because she talked to plants. She was accused of flying at night to meetings with the devil because sometimes she gathered herbs by moonlight when their power was strongest. Every innocent action was twisted into evidence of malevolence. Mary defended herself as well as she could. She spoke of God, of prayer, of service to her community. She offered to show them her methods, to teach them about the plants, to demonstrate that there was nothing evil in what she did. But the judges had already decided. They needed a witch to punish, a scapegoat to satisfy the mob's fear. Mary was convenient. She was sentenced to death, hanging, they decided, because burning was too expensive and required too much wood. Mary heard the sentence with a strange sense of detachment. She had lived a long life, had done good work, had helped many people. If this was how it ended, if people's fear and ignorance won in the end, she couldn't stop it. But she could die with dignity, knowing the truth of who she was and what she had done. The day of execution came. Mary was led to the village square where a scaffold had been erected. A crowd had gathered, some looking ashamed, others righteous and satisfied. Mary stood on the platform and looked out at the faces she had known her whole life. Faces of people she had healed, babies she had helped deliver, children she had cured of childhood diseases, and now they watched her die, either believing the lies or too afraid to speak the truth. In her final moments, as the noose was placed around her neck, Mary didn't curse anyone or plead for mercy. She simply spoke a prayer, asking that the plants continue to help people, that someone would remember the old ways of healing, that knowledge wouldn't die with her. She forgave those who had condemned her, understanding that they were driven by fear rather than malice. And then the floor dropped away, and Mary's life ended. Claire experienced Mary's death, felt the moment of transition from life to whatever came after, and in that moment, she understood what Dr. Helen had guided her to see. Mary's unjust death, her persecution for the crime of healing, had left a deep imprint on her soul. The knowledge Mary had carried, the relationship with plants and healing, was so precious that her soul had held on to it, carried it forward through lifetimes, waiting for a time and place where it could be used again without fear of persecution. Dr. Helen guided Claire to the space between lives, to the place where Mary's soul had gone after death. Claire found herself in a realm of peace and light, surrounded by loving presences. These were her guides. She understood, beings who had been with her soul through many incarnations. They showed her that Mary's lifetime had been important, that the knowledge she had carried and the compassion she had embodied were gifts her soul had chosen to develop. The tragic ending didn't diminish the value of what Mary had accomplished. The guides also explained that Claire's current lifetime as an accountant, seemingly so different from Mary's life as a healer, had been deliberate. Her soul had needed time away from healing work, time in a different kind of service that used different skills, but the knowledge Mary had gained was never lost. It remained encoded in Claire's soul, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The visit to the botanical garden had been that moment, the trigger that awakened the sleeping memories. Dr. Helen asked Claire what she wanted to do with this knowledge, now that she had remembered. Claire felt a surge of emotion. She wanted to honor Mary's legacy, to continue the healing work in a modern context. She didn't need to live in a cottage and gather herbs by moonlight, but she could study herbalism properly, could combine Mary's intuitive knowledge with modern scientific understanding, could help people in ways that honored both the old wisdom and new discoveries. Dr. Helen brought Claire back to the present slowly and gently. When Claire opened her eyes, she was crying but also smiling. Everything made sense now. The unexplainable knowledge of herbs, the intuitive understanding of healing, the deep recognition she had felt in the botanical garden. It was all Mary, all that lifetime of devoted service to healing, finally being remembered and reclaimed. In the months that followed, Claire's life changed dramatically. She enrolled in courses on herbal medicine, fascinated to discover that so much of what Mary had known intuitively was backed up by modern research. Plants really did contain compounds that affected the body in specific ways. The old knowledge wasn't superstition. It was practical wisdom accumulated over generations of careful observation. She also started a garden, growing some of the herbs Mary had worked with. And as she planted and tended them, she felt that same sense of relationship Mary had described. The plants did seem to communicate, not in words but in feelings and intuitions. She would know when they needed water, when they were ready to harvest, what they wanted to teach her. It wasn't magic or witchcraft. It was simply a form of awareness that modern people had largely lost but could still access when they opened themselves to it. Claire didn't quit her job immediately. She needed the income and wasn't ready to leap into a completely new career. But she started seeing clients on weekends, offering herbal consultations, helping people find natural remedies for common ailments. Word spread quickly. People were hungry for this kind of healing, for someone who could bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern life. She thought often about Mary, about the courage it had taken to be a healer in a time when such work was dangerous. She felt grateful that she lived in an era where herbalism was legal and increasingly respected. She could practice openly, could share knowledge freely, could help people without fear of persecution. Mary's wish that the knowledge wouldn't die had been fulfilled. Claire was proof of that, living evidence that wisdom could survive across centuries and lifetimes. Claire also worked on healing the trauma Mary had carried, the fear of persecution, the pain of being misjudged and condemned. Those wounds had traveled forward with the knowledge. Claire found herself initially hesitant to share her work widely, afraid of judgment or ridicule. But with therapy and intentional healing work, she gradually released that fear. She wasn't Mary. This wasn't 1643. She could be open about her gifts without risking her life. Years passed. Claire built a thriving practice combining herbal medicine with modern wellness approaches. She taught workshops, wrote articles, helped hundreds of people discover the healing power of plants. And through it all, she felt Mary's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder, a quiet voice of encouragement, a reminder of where this knowledge came from and how precious it was. She visited the botanical garden regularly, that place where it had all begun, and each time, she thanked Mary for holding on to the knowledge, for refusing to let it die even when she was killed for possessing it. She thanked the plants for their continued willingness to help humanity. And she renewed her own commitment to being a bridge between the old ways and the new, honoring the past while embracing the present. Claire understood now that she was part of a lineage that stretched back centuries, maybe millennia. Healers and herbalists and wise women who had kept knowledge alive through persecution and suppression, who had whispered secrets to their daughters and granddaughters, who had preserved the understanding of how plants could help humans heal. Mary was one link in that chain, and Claire was another. Looking back on the moment in the botanical garden when everything had started, Claire felt nothing but gratitude. What had seemed like a breakdown had actually been a breakthrough. What had seemed like confusion had actually been remembering. Her soul had been trying to tell her something important, trying to reconnect her with a part of herself she had forgotten. And once she listened, once she allowed the memories to surface and the knowledge to return, her whole life had transformed. She wondered sometimes about her other past lives, about what other knowledge and experiences her soul carried. But Mary's lifetime remained the most significant, the one that had the most direct impact on her current life. And that was okay. Not every past life needed to be remembered. Some remained in the background, influencing her subtly without requiring conscious awareness. But Mary's life, with its deep wisdom and tragic end, had needed to be brought into the light, had needed to be honored and integrated. Claire made peace with the duality of being both an accountant and an herbalist, both a modern woman and the continuation of an ancient tradition. She didn't have to choose one or the other. She could be both, could honor the practical skills of her current self while also embracing the soul-deep calling that came from Mary's lifetime. This integration felt whole and right, like two parts of her that had been separate were finally coming together. And the plants kept teaching her, kept speaking to her in that subtle language she had learned to hear. Every time she worked with them, every time she created a remedy or helped someone heal, she felt Mary's satisfaction, Mary's joy that the work was continuing, that the knowledge was being used, that healing was still happening across the bridge of centuries. Subscribe to remember the wisdom your soul has been carrying across lifetimes.